All right, quick test. Which 90s cyber flick starts with an 11-year-old kid getting banned from computers and a touch-tone telephone after crashing over 1,000 systems? If you said hackers, you're vibing in the right nostalgia zone. And also, yes, that very specific part of the movie is absolutely a fictionalized homage to real early internet chaos. In fact, Zero Cool's backstory mirrors an actual 1988 internet worm event where a student-made program brought down a big chunk of the internet. Okay, fine, the whole nerd kingdom, in a surprisingly dramatic way. And tonight, we dive into that moment, the real one, which is way less rollerblades and neon, and way more, oops, did I just break the internet? So, let's talk about the Morris worm. Not a horror worm that crawls out of your monitor like the Ring, unless your monitor runs SynMail, in which case, yes, it was kind of terrifying. This was the first self-replicating program to accidentally crash a chunk of the early internet. And not just one server. We're talking universities, research labs, networks humans actually used. And before you ask, no, there was no firewall, no multi-factor authentication, and definitely no, are you a robot CAPTCHAs. Just trust, lots of trust, and even more optimism. Honestly, it sounds like the distant ancestor of every security incident we've ever had since. In 1988, the internet wasn't a consumer product. It was roughly 60,000 hosts, mostly academic and government systems. If you weren't doing research, you probably weren't on it. And because it was so new, nobody really locked anything down. People assumed people were researchers too. And that trust model, cute, until it wasn't. So, here's the guy, Robert Morris, a graduate student at Cornell. Smart, curious, maybe slightly reckless around network debris. I mean, his dad worked at the NSA, so maybe he grew up hearing that curiosity is a virtue, and also maybe a national security risk. Morris wanted to answer a simple question. How big is the internet? Today, we just consult any number of tools, but back then, you wrote a self-replicating program that hopped from system to system, quietly counting machines. And to be fair, that plan sounds like a reasonable PhD problem if you've had 3 cups of coffee and none of your friends are paying attention. So, here's where things get deliciously chaotic. Morris was worried that system administrators would notice his worm and try to stop it. In response, he added a check. If a machine said, "Hey, I've already been infected," the worm was programmed to sometimes ignore that warning and reinfect it anyway, just in case. 10% reinfecting each other. It's like double-clicking something that only needed 1 click, except now thousands of machines are doing it at the same time. In this case, the server CPUs started choking, and within hours, systems were sluggish, unresponsive, and crashing. Networks slowed, universities went down, labs crashed mid-print, and admins started calling each other on the phone. Phones. You remember phones, right? There was no X, Facebook, or even MySpace. No Knox, and IRC wasn't really a thing yet either. Just a lot of confused humans trying to figure out what the hell happened. Some thought it was sabotage. Others thought it was foreign interference. And nope, just a grad student's brainchild, running wild. The Morris worm incident triggered one of the very first major applications of the U.S. Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, a statute passed only 2 years earlier in 1986. In simplest terms, the CFAA was designed to criminalize unauthorized access and similar abuses of computers. It was untested at the time, more theoretical than practical. Suddenly, here comes an unprecedented case, one that didn't just poke at a server, but disrupted hundreds of systems across networks. Morris was prosecuted under the CFAA, and the court's reasoning laid early groundwork for how digital disruptions could be handled under U.S. law, including how intent factors into culpability when damage is real, even if incidental. He wasn't sent to a cyber prison dungeon, but the legal precedent mattered. It was the moment the law stopped being paper code and started being internet reality. And yes, if anyone here is thinking of arguing emotion someday? That's exactly the kind of early case that still gets cited when people dust off old CFAA language. Even after all that, Morris didn't fade into obscurity. He became a professor at MIT, teaching computer science and cybersecurity. Talk about coming full circle. The guy who broke the early internet ended up shaping how future generations protect it. That's not a villain arc. That's an academic redemption song. This wasn't a deliberate cyber attack. It was curiosity, plus a teeny bit of hubris, multiplied across an immature network. And that recipe, we still see it today. Security disasters rarely start with some cartoon villain cackle. Mwahaha! They start with assumptions, overconfidence, and, well, what if this might work? That sounds eerily familiar, honestly. We still do this. I still do this. Your code still does this, especially if you're running Claude code with the dangerously skip permissions flag set. And the internet still whispers, not again. If you enjoyed this and want even nerdier tales, bonus anecdotes, behind-the-scenes chaos, or the always questionable outtakes of me flubbing lines on camera, then come join me on Patreon. There's a link in the description. Every dollar supports this channel's projects, and I donate a portion of to the retro and vintage computer community so that the history we love keeps getting preserved. Please like, subscribe, do the algorithm ritual, because unlike 1988, we actually depend on this thing now. See you next time.
Yo, kinda feel like God.